I told you earlier that Aircraft Spruce sent me the wrong material for the drag wires in the wings. They sent me 6061 aluminum, and that's this right here. And I made all the drag wires, threaded both ends, and thankfully I discovered that's not what the plans call for. They call for 2024 aluminum. You may not think it's a big deal, but the drag wires are in tension. That's what they do. They pull the wing together. They pull the spars together to form a strong box structure. 2024 aluminum, as it turns out, has a tensile strength of, I think, about 10,000 psi greater than 6061. That ends up being, I think it's like 20% more. I think it's something like 50,000 psi versus 60,000 psi. So I reordered all of it, and I've got to remake all the drag wires. When I made them the first time around, I discovered that it's a little bit challenging using a wrench, which I've got right here somewhere, that looks kind of like this, or actually exactly like this. This is the one. Oopsie daisy. And the die just drops in here. You lock it in place with this thumb screw, and then you just turn this by hand to thread. Now, I thought that that was pretty challenging to get the threads, started straight. Eventually, this screws on enough that it straightens out on the rod that you're threading. But initially, it's pretty tough to hold this wrench square to the piece while you're turning it and pushing on it to get the threads started. And some of my threads started crooked. Threads on the end were a little bit crooked. Now, if all your nuts that you screw onto that rod go on past the beginning, it may not be a big issue because they'll get to a point where the threads are square. If they're closer to the end where your threads aren't square, maybe they're at an angle, then the nut, if it's got pressure on it this way and the nut's at an angle, so if you've got the rod, here's the rod, and you slide a bracket on there, then you put the nut on and the bracket's sitting against the nut. If the nut's at an angle, the pressure will be only on one side of that nut, not the whole nut. And that's a big potential weakness. So I wanted to figure out a way that would make it easy to get perfectly square threads starting from the very, very end. So I thought to myself, how can I mount this in a chuck? I could put it in a drill. It'd be easy to hold the drill to go square onto the rod, or I could mount it in the chuck on my lathe, and that's even better. Guaranteed to be perfectly square. And I tried to mount it in the jaws of the chuck. I think maybe this is even 5/8. Yeah, it's 5/8, but it still really wasn't ideal. It had to go way into the chuck and just didn't mount very well in there. Probably because this is not round. So there are parts that stick out, these corners, they stick out further than 5/8 of an inch, which is the size of the chuck. If it were just round 5/8, I'm sure it would go right in. So that didn't work. So anyway, long story short, you've got this gizmo. This goes in a drill chuck or in one of the magnetic holders that's in your hand drill, so you can swap tools out easily. 3/8 inch drive here on the end. And what I needed was basically 5/8 inch socket that this could go into, but it needed to be a deep socket. So I thought, okay, I'll go buy one. This is a great idea. This should work. And online, some guy actually mentioned a spark plug socket. Turns out I had a spark plug socket that's 5/8 of an inch, and it's deep. So on each end of the drag wires, I'm forming a 1.5 inch thread. I'm doing a shorted thread on this end, but this one needs to be 1.5 inches. This is deep enough to do that. Next problem, I mount this on here in this guy, stick this in here, but then I drop the die in here and it falls way down in there. And then I can't see anything, and once it starts threading, I can't do 1.5 inches. So I just needed a way to support the die way out here, but let the rod go through. So I already had some aluminum rod that I used to make the compression tube locators. Made this plenty big for the rod to go through. Made it so it fits right in there. And it's flat. It's going to be perfectly perpendicular to the axis. This drops in, sits right on top of it, perfectly square, and the rod can go right through there. Tighten this down. There you go. This wiggles a little bit, but that doesn't matter, because once it hits the rod that's coming through here, it will line up perfectly, because the rod will just pull it right in into correct alignment. So let's get this close to where I've got the threads there. And it doesn't matter that this is not super strong and well supported, because we're not pushing perpendicular to the axis. We're just coming straight onto it, so it doesn't need to be super strong and super well supported. And as it turns out, I won't keep you waiting, this works great. So let's give it a try. And you might be a little surprised what happens with the long end, how I'm going to do that, and how well it works, but I'll show you. But we'll do this 1/2 inch end first. Alright, I got the lathe set on its slowest speed. Let's fire it up. I got my lubricant here, a Lume tap. And here we go. Nice and slow. 96 RPM. Alright. So I'm just going to feed the tailstock in manually. The die is not bolted in here, it's loose. So if I don't go fast enough, it'll just pull the die a little bit out. That shouldn't matter at all. Mainly, if I feel pressure as I turn the tailstock, I want to ease up. I don't want to go too fast and shove the die on. I want to let basically the thread cutter of the die pull it along, and I just feed this enough to keep up with it, that's all. And then I'll stop the spindle, and then what I can do, I can either reverse it and back off along with it, but I think the smarter way to do it is just to turn the lathe off, back the tailstock off, and then I can just unscrew the die by hand. Let's give it a shot. Get it started here. There we go. It's cutting. I'll just turn the hand dial here so it keeps up. I got a red line on there. That's how deep I want to go, not too deep. There we go. Back this off. Actually, let's see. I don't have enough space, so pull this out. So you got to clean the die out before the next cut. There we go. It's clean and ready to go. And the threads are perfect. Now the other end is 1.5 inches that I need to thread. And I know you hear people say, well, you need to turn the die a little bit and then back it off, and then turn it a little bit, then back it off, then turn it a little bit and back it off. Well, my experience with this project says that it works just fine just to feed it all the way for that 1.5 inches. So let's try it. So really, I think the only thing that matters is there enough room for all the chips made by the cutting? Is there enough space for those? Is there some place for them to go? So that's what let's see here. But yeah, this is easy to keep it perfectly aligned, and it's quicker than doing it by hand if you're in a hurry. All right, there we go. It's cutting. Clean out the die. There's a bunch of stuff in it. Done. Ready for the next one. There you go. Beautiful threads all the way to the end, and perfectly square and straight on the end. So if the nut is down there, it'll be perfectly aligned, and there'll be a load. The load bearing will be evenly distributed all the way around the diameter. You might expect it to get a little bit messy at the end when the cutter gets clogged up, but it looks perfect. There you go. Quick and easy and perfectly aligned threads on a lathe with a die.